To start day 3 of the Covering Equitable Community Development Journalism Fellowship, the focus is on advocating for your community when the numbers are small. In Montana in 2022, 4.5% of the population was Hispanic, 85.3% was white, 0.6% were black, 5.9% were American Indian Native, Alaska Native, and 1.1% were Asian Pacific Islander. So what's at stake for communities when it's time to weigh in on not only policy decisions, but direct resources and services for residents? Our speakers this morning are going to look into what advocating for community is like when you're, quote, a member of the minority group in that setting. We're going to start with Murray Pierce. Murray is the Director of Multicultural Affairs at the University of Montana, where he provides administrative training and mentors and counsels BIPOC students. He is also a co-founder of the Montana Black Collective, and he came to Missoula in 1974 and has some profound insights into community building and engagement in Montana. Next to Murray is Heidi Wallace. Heidi is the Executive Director of Empower Montana, where she leads efforts to correct systemic inequities and strengthen communities across Montana and beyond. She's also a Montana native who grew up on the Flathead Reservation, is that? Oh, okay. And her deep-rooted sense of place and community in Montana has been the foundation for her commitment to social justice. Then we're joined by Regime Seabrook. Regime is the Director of Equity and Impact at Empower Montana, alongside of Heidi. And he's also a co-founder of the Montana Black Collective. He serves on the Missoula City and County JEDI Advisory Board, and that stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion?
Correct.
So this is a citywide initiative
City and county
initiative to support those initiatives. And on the Board of Trustees for American Red Cross, Montana. His journey to Missoula is quite interesting. I found him on YouTube, as I've been telling everybody. And so it'll definitely be of interest to you as to why he came and why he stayed in Missoula. And last but not least, we have Jessica Moniz Hernandez. She's the Director of Youth Engagement with Empower MT. She is passionate about serving youthful communities and also has a perspective about the Hispanic community, about finding your people in a setting like Missoula or Montana. I said last but not least, but we're also joined by Chris Young-Greer. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I forgot to print you out on this.
That's okay. My name is Chris Young-Greer. I have been.
You have the mic?
My name is Chris Young-Greer, and I have been here in Montana for 8 years now. My husband was born and raised here in Montana, but I am the Director of Racial Justice Equity at the YWCA here in Missoula. I am also one of the co-founders of the Montana Black Collective of Missoula as well. I don't serve on the board of the City and County JEDI team, but I am one of the committee members. So
you see, we have a broad scope here of people who are going to offer us some insights into this issue. And I wanted to start with Murray. You should all know that Murray is probably one of the best cooks I've ever met in my life. Yes. He had the privilege of seeing the community that he's built in the past 50 years here in Montana, because I was invited to an event at his home on Sunday. But I want you to take us back to 1974, why you came to the University of Montana, and what it was like here as one of a few, very few black students.
Okay. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for coming out on Sunday as well, too. I really appreciate it and enjoyed even meeting you one-on-one. That was great. First and foremost, just let you know that we're on the traditional lands of the Salish and Kootenai and Ponderay tribes here in Montana, and pay reference to your tribal affiliation. I am from Cincinnati, Ohio. Got here in 1974. Listened to Cincinnati Public Radio, listened to all sorts of different stations in Cincinnati when I was growing up. I came here as an athlete. I was recruited out of Cincinnati. There were 11 of us from the Ohio All-Star team, believe it or not, that all came to Montana through the efforts of a quarterback that was playing here, and he came, recruited us, and a bunch of us came here. I'm the only one that stayed and graduated. I came particularly, I had other offers in other places, but back in those days, there was kind of a foreign concept. You listen to what your parents said, And my dad was one that said, "You're going to Montana." I went, "Hey, I've got Ohio State, I've got Indiana, I've got these places." Why? He said, "Because there, you don't know anybody there, you'll grow up and you'll become a man." That's what he said. I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that on a regular basis, I would call back home and talk to my dear mother, who empathized with me and sympathized with me what I was going through. My dad would walk by the conversation and go, "Is that Murray?" She said, "Yes, tell him he ain't coming home." He just keep going. So that was my foray first into Montana. In 1974, Missoula was a lot different. Missoula was the liberal hotbed of Montana, if you can believe that then, and it still claims to be today to some degree too. Population was about 35,000, 30 to 40,000, and there were probably about 75 to 80 students who claimed African American ancestry here. I got on campus, it was culture shock for me. I grew up in a black, German, and Jewish neighborhood, went to a predominantly black high school, but there were lots of different other ethnicities and races that went to that high school as well too. And when I came here, it was a shock, to say the least. It was a shock. So there was a lot of adjustment that went on, a lot of unlearning that had to happen while I was here too, because I think that when you're in a situation that you're placed into a situation that's markedly different than something that you grew up in or something that you understood, you've got perceptions about that, but you also have a lot of, as I said, unlearning to do as well too. So that was critical for me. One of the blessings that I had here was the Black Student Union on campus. And for those of you who don't know, the University of Montana Black Student Union is the third such organization in the country. It was founded after, there's some debate between Cal State Fullerton and University of San Francisco. But we were one of the first three that was founded in the country. Founded by 4 people, 2 women and two gentlemen. Both were on the football team at the time, so dispelling the myth that football players could only play football. And they took it upon themselves to not ask, but to demand things. We were within the context of an ethos that was the civil rights movement on steroids to a very large degree, and so people were wondering, do those things really apply to Montana? Because in many respects, people felt that there weren't enough of us here to pose a threat to some degree. So it wasn't that we were seen as oddities to some degree, but I remember that Bill Withers song when he said, when you're at the zoo, when you're looking at the monkey's looking right back at you. So a lot of those things we experienced and we saw here, and we bonded together behind that stuff. Community was incredibly important at that time. It's important now, but back then, when there was a lot of negativity, when it was easier to cast dispersions. Folks could say what they want to say to your face and walk away and do those things. But we stood proud and strong. We stood proud and strong, and so I'm proud to have been affiliated with that group and continue to be till today. Missoula, there were other people that were here. I would again be remiss if I didn't talk about Ulysses Doss. Ulysses Doss was one of King's right-hand men. He had come from Chicago. He had been basically threatened by the KKK in Chicago and had some folks that he knew here in Missoula and came to Missoula. Well, Ulysses, being who Ulysses was, talked to President Panzer at the bequest of the Black Student Union, the newly formed Black Student Union, and they said, "Hey, we want representation in the faculty and staff here." And Ulysses came in, and Ulysses wasn't a professor at the time, but Panzer was looking to quell some of the unrest that was on campus and said, "Hey, what are you willing to do?" He said, "I'm willing to do anything that I can to support students of color here." He had graduated magna cum laude. He was a track star. I can't remember what university he came from, but in the UC, in the University Center here, you'll see the Doss Conference Room. It's named after him and in respect to what he had done for the university. So those were some of the things that were really pushed by this burgeoning group that came to the fore here. fast forward a few years, I'd graduated, and I had purchased some property here. I raised dogs, and that's why people, what do you say in Montana? I say, dogs. I raised these gigantic Japanese Mastiff. They were like 185 pounds or so. I had like 5 or 6 of them, and I needed space for them. So I bought some property here, built a house myself. That's one of the things that I think Montana teaches you is a large degree of self-sufficiency. Yes. I'd never built anything before in my life, but I thought, I can do that. So me and a couple other cats that were here, guys that were good friends of mine that were in the carpentry business, said, yeah, we can do that. So we got together and I built my place. And I had my dogs there and all that other stuff like that. So that's part of the reason why I stayed. I had a deep and abiding interest in social justice issues, and I didn't even know how that really developed, but I grew out of a situation where my pastor in my church, one of my churches that I went to, an African-American Episcopal church in Cincinnati, was Fred Shuttlesworth, one of King's right-hand men. So he was my pastor growing up. My dad was a deacon in the church. I went to a couple other churches too that my mom had been a part of as well too. So those things, I guess, were ingrained in me, and I was being taught something without it really know that I was learning something.
I'm going to jump in here because one of the recurring themes for our discussions is lived experience and how it impacts policy decisions and a whole range of things. It's fascinating to me to hear you say that Fred Shuttlesworth was someone who impacted you in your life. Your family influence on you is what led you to the path of equity and justice. I want to pivot really quickly here. 50 years ago, 25 years ago. What it was so interesting to me about Regim's story is that you grew up in New York City?
Correct.
Grew up in New York City, upper middle class black family, is that correct? So
Correct.
His mother was born in the Bronx.
South Bronx.
South Bronx,
Yep.
and his father's family, upper middle class. And so he said you were the Huxtables before the Huxtables existed, is that correct?
Yeah. Well, my grandfather and my grandmother and my great aunts and uncles and that side of the family were the Huxtables before the Huxtables knew they were going to be the Huxtables. And literally the other side of the tracks was my mother's family, who grew up in the South Bronx on Randall Avenue and grew up in the housing projects where there were 3 times as many rats and roaches as there were apartments available and the people within. So growing up, as you said, I was very dichotomous by nature, choice, and design because I had to live in 2 different worlds and try to navigate that during the late 70s and early 80s in New York City, which were a pivotal point not only for New York but for America. We had the real first impacts of civil rights. When I was born the year Murray moved here, so when you think about 1974, some of those last really big civil rights acts were 68, 69, 70, and then I'm born 4 years later. So people of my generation, of my age, are really the first beneficiaries of a lot of those things. But New York was in a pivotal situation, and being an upper middle class black Baptist / Catholic family was almost unheard of, and was as to borrow a word from Murray, a rarity, if you will. So having that one side and then just impoverished on the other, also infused with alcoholism and just intergeneration, multi-generational abuse, is tough. So I learned how to navigate 2 different worlds of being too rich and poor for one part of the family and too poor and rich for the other side. So I learned how to be Robin in the Hood. And I learned how to wear a pair of Jordans on one leg and a pair of penny loafers on the other. But what that brought about was the ability to see the polarization of 2 different worlds. The access that I had to things were access that my friends and other family members from the other side did not, like education, religion, sports, community organizing, mid-level politics. And for me, that set me on a course of education and social work to better the world around me, because again, due to the access that I had and the abilities that I had and the things that my grandfather and grandmother helped create and sustain, gave me a leg up, but it didn't give me the leg out. And with that being said, I always made it a point to take what I was given and so blessed with and bring it back to the peoples and say, hey, I know that this isn't what you're learning in school, but here's a copy of this book, here's a copy of this, here's a video, here's this speaking engagement. Like my grandfather speaking here, like, you know, back then Mario Cuomo, he was, my grandfather was one of his people, and like I was like, come to these things, come meet David Dinkins, come meet, you know, like do these things, and those friends were like, what are you talking about? But then the other side was like, hey, rich friends, like can you spread the wealth? And there was the impasse. So then you learned how to navigate both sides of the tracks.
I want to jump in there because, again, I, in my early career, just wanted to be a feature writer. For me, just profiling people and putting their stories on the printed page was the ultimate goal. But what I want to model repeatedly during this training is ask questions about the motivations of the people who are doing this work. Ask them, just as we learned yesterday about Grant Keir, whose, you know, childhood life experience leads him to be very passionate about daycare or child care. For Regime, what's fascinating to me is that coming from an upper middle class background, he could have very well made the choice of, you know, I want to go be a lawyer or be a doctor or make a lot of money or do whatever. And it's a conscious, he chose a conscious, made a conscious decision to think about social justice and think about others and think about people who don't have, and to pretty much dedicate his life to that, which I thought it was really intriguing. So to bring us to Missoula, how did you get to Missoula?
Due to just family loss and strife, I moved here as a young man many moons ago. Literally 25 to the day that Murray moved here, 25 years later. It kind of feels like, you know, Marty McFly and Professor Brown right here. It's a Back to the Future moment. And I moved here to not necessarily escape, but to exhale. Living in New York is a very stifling place. And growing up at the time and dealing with such family tragedy and family loss, I needed a place to exhale. And after the dust settled back home, my grandfather was a huge advocate for saying, remain where you are. You don't need to be anything other than what you need to be, and that's a young man, and aspire to be that. And moving to Missoula, Montana, because I had friends here who were going to school, because back in the day you could like afford to live here and afford to go to school here. And education was pretty cheap, especially when you compare East Coast dollars to Rocky Mountain dollars. There was a great dollar exchange rate of you make this much, but you're only paying this much. So school was inexpensive. But Missoula allowed me a place to kind of recalibrate, if you will, after family loss and strife. But it also allowed me to gain perspective of where I was to where I am now. And Missoula, Montana, at the time, like Murray said, was a very different place even 25 years ago. The pockets of community were liberal, were welcoming. It's the blueberry pie amidst the rest of the cherry pie state. And it was a very interesting place where my family feared. They equated Montana to the south, where a lot of my family lives in North Carolina, South Carolina, and the like. And I said, no, Montana's a very different place. I said, they were like, well, what's the racial demographics? Because my grandfather's, back then it was 90%. Like the demographics and statistics were very different than the ones that you read off earlier. And they were afraid for my safety and my well-being. And I said, the difference between a lot of the places back east and here, I said, the ignorance back east is by choice. Because when you walk into a room and you see the diversity of the room, you choose to be ignorant or you choose to be biased, that's by choice. Whereas places like Montana, due to the siloed geographical location, some of that ignorance is due to lack of exposure. And understanding that there's different ways to look at things, and the questions, and I don't want to take anything away from Heidi because she says these things so great, the amount of curiosity that I was engaging versus the amount of judgment that I grew up with was a very different feel, which then allowed me to navigate differently in a different space, in a different world, albeit a super small minority in almost like for me, a cultural desert.
You set up Heidi brilliantly, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
So with Empower Montana, tell us a little bit about your own approach to social justice. I got to know you a little bit on Sunday, and you talked about growing up and your own personal. Take it away. Tell us about that.
Yeah, you want to hear that personal stuff?
Well, a little bit of it, but just enough to because again, I think in settings like this, it could be too easy to say she is a white female working in this sphere, but we could have impressions that maybe you come from wealth, or you come from this, or you come from affluence, or you come from. Tell us who you are and how you got into the social justice journey.
Thank you, Mary and Rajeem. That was a lovely trip down memory lane with you. Yeah, I born and raised in Montana. My mom's family is from Wolf Point, which is in the northeast corner of Montana on the Fort Peck Reservation. Assiniboine and Sioux tribal nation is there. And I spent all my summers there as a child. And it was my experiences spending summer in Wolf Point and on my grandpa's farm that I feel the seeds of social justice were planted. I was immersed in a lot of stereotypes and prejudices towards the indigenous people in Wolf Point. It was a literal physical division of othering in the town. And so that was one perspective. Then I had the romanticized perspective because I was able to go to powwows and celebrations and see this total other perspective of indigenous culture. And then on my grandpa's farm, sitting around the kitchen table, drinking coffee and listening to my grandpa and the other native farmers talking about cows, weather, and naps. So I got these really conflicting perspectives of the indigenous people of Montana. And I didn't have the language to ask questions. I didn't have the opportunities to build, friendships across those group lines. And I really feel like that was my driving force for wanting to deepen my understanding about not only indigenous people in Montana, but people different from me. And, I was raised with less than enough resources. So that lens was one way for me to really want to expand my understanding of othering, oppression, and how I could be active in my allyship. If you've been in Montana long enough, you'll get a sense of there's a Montana pride here. And, I have that because of love of place, really rooted in that. And because of Professor Doss and other amazing mentors here at the university, I started to unpack a lot of that hidden awareness around privilege and how could I balance love of place with this acknowledgement of settler legacy and active allyship. And, at the university here, I studied social work and Native American studies and found my way to Empower Montana, which is the organization I'm representing today. And it's something special about the founding of Empower Montana. It was founded on campus in 1998 by a couple amazing individuals who recognized that there was no organization in Montana working towards anti-racism, working towards anti-homophobia and transphobia. And so for me to be able to represent an organization that is trying to provide opportunities for people to build understanding, to get more skills, to get more opportunities to build connections across group lines and start to peel back those layers. just to deepen that awareness of other people. And, speaking with Rachel, I love how you shared, you want to get to people's stories, what informs them. And that is really the heart of our work, doing, anti-racism, equity, inclusion, belonging work in Montana. For 25 years, you have to meet people where they're at with curiosity. And you want to discover what makes you you. What are your identities, your life experiences that have really shaped your worldview, shaped your comfort with different groups? And, building off what Rajim said, some people haven't left their county in their whole life. So to meet them where they're at with that curiosity to build that awareness and find those opportunities to give new information.
You are reminding me of, I think, a theory that I'm developing just from hearing your conversations this morning about why this work is more possible in this setting than it might be in others. And so I'm going to get to that. But I want to make sure that each of you sort of introduce yourselves. But Chris, and you're saving you for the last, Jess, because I think your story and your testimony is really powerful. But tell us about your entry point into Montana and why you stayed.
So, a little background on me. I was born in Bakersfield, California. We were incredibly poor, but I guess we could say we were so broke we couldn't pay attention, But everybody that was in my neighborhood, which was predominantly Black and Hispanic, we were all in the same boat. My father was born and raised in Texas, and so I grew up, what brought me to this work is I grew up hearing a lot of stories when I shouldn't have been listening, being nosy as a kid, about racism that my father had incurred, being a Black man in Texas. And I didn't know what that was all about. It didn't really come to me why that was such a horrible thing until remembering or having the experience of my father saving for a year to buy this new car, a GTO. And he had been in conversation with the dealership for over 2 months, talking with them on the phone. And the day finally came that he was to go down and purchase this car with cash. And I remember my father coming back and me being sent off into the kitchen, Christine, go and get out of here because something was wrong, right? He didn't come back with this car. And from being nosy and listening to the story that he shared with my mother, when he got there, they told him that he didn't look like he sounded. And they refused to sell the car to a racial epithet word, right? And that was the first time that I saw my father cry. My father was always this strong, amazing individual for me. But in that moment, he looked less than 4 feet tall and like a child. He was so incredibly disappointed. And something changed in me at that moment, because I'm thinking, why? Everything was all set. And to see my father broken, all those other stories that I'd heard about what I didn't have word and language for at the time, racism, now started to fit together. The puzzle pieces started to fit together. And from that point on, I was angry, but angry in a way to where it prompted me to do something. And so I had a conversation with my father and said, what can we do? How can I stop people like you from crying? And he told me that I couldn't. Now, me being Chris, only thing I need to hear is that you can't, right? Because that just prompts me to do. And as a result of that, I made sure growing up that I went to live musicals and I positioned myself in places to where people like me didn't usually go. And I was always ready to educate someone who would tell me that I didn't belong there or was ready to ask me a question, sometimes very eloquently, sometimes hoodish, depending upon the situation that it called for. But being here in Montana, unlike these beautiful humans that I have found family in, because I am an only child, coming to Montana, I live in the Bitterroot Valley, excuse me, where I believe the median age is 64. And I'm the only one that I ever see down there that looks like me. And I've had lots of encounters with individuals in the grocery stores where people have questioned why I am here. You know, what brought me here? Am I just visiting? You know, am I a homeowner? You know, I mean, very, very invasive things. So my experiences are a little different, and I've shared these with Rajim and Murray and even Heidi, you know, when I need that safe place to land and have these conversations. So having had those experiences here in Montana, it's like I am in the very place that I am supposed to be to continue to do this type of work, because I believe in education. And I believe what Rajim said, that sometimes it's just the lack of knowledge and opportunity to engage in a conversation with someone who doesn't look like you, being here in Montana. And I'm here for that. You know, I am also part of the BSU. Murray was a mentor, which is how I got to meet him. But I also remember what it was like trying to find community of people that looked and thought and felt the way that I did. And coming back to school here, I am a graduate, an alum of Go Grizz. And I studied sociology with emphasis in inequality and social justice, and women and gender sexuality studies. And the first time that I set foot on this campus, I was looking so hard because I'd heard there are black folks on campus. You know, and I remember seeing a young woman walking across the lawn who she and I end up becoming very good friends. Her name is Michelle Cox. And I ran up to her and said, "Hi, my name is Chris. What are you doing here?" You know, and as a result, through that interaction, I got to meet Murray and some other amazing people here. But the reason that I continue to do this work, Rachel, is because that situation with my father never leaves my mind.
Powerful, powerful. As I said, Jess, I saved you for last because when we were talking up front and you talked about your soccer team and your friends on your work with youth empowerment with Empower Montana obviously puts you in the sphere of a wide range of young people from different backgrounds. But tell us about finding fueling your identity as a Hispanic woman in a community where your numbers are small.
Yeah. Wow. So I'll kind of start a little bit from the beginning and lead myself to here in Montana. But I always think it's important for me. It's talking about positionality. I am half white, half Mexican. I'm very proud to be Mexican. I'm very connected. That's where I am closest with my family. And I guess I didn't realize how important that was to me until I left. California is where I grew up. I was born in Glendale, grew up in Rancho Cucamonga, then moved to the Bay Area where I finished high school, and then I like to joke that I ran away to Montana. But it was really, that stark experience of coming here and kind of really unscaffolding my own cultural background and what that meant to me. I guess I never thought a lot about how I looked. It's just more of how I felt and who I was surrounded by in my community. And then being here, not having people who shared similar experiences was interesting, and really being aware of the privilege of what it is to look like the way I do and exist in a place where people don't always know you're Mexican. For my experience, and then having really strange encounters due to like my last name or just certain experiences when people know who my family is. And I came for Parks and Rec Management at the College of Forestry. I talk about trying to fit in. I bought like flannels and hiking boots, and I love all that stuff, but I bring my own flair now, and I just was not a flannel person. But you just try to fit in because it's, that's just kind of what happens. But then over time, just really my lens through social work kind of opened up because I was in these classes going on these outdoor trips, traveling all around Montana, and just really seeing the lack of representation of such a variety of communities. And I'll also speak, I'm a queer person, I'm part of the LGBTQ plus community, and that's another lens that comes in that feels more invisible sometimes. And so, yeah, just kind of witnessing these things. I turned out all my Parks and Rec papers were about like, where are all the like Mexican people in the outdoors? Like, you know, what is this experience? And then I got connected to the Latino Outdoors group, and that is its own conversation talking about the intersection of culture with these experiences. My family back home jokes, why would you live in a tent for fun if that's something we got out of, and have the privilege and luxury to be in a house now? Why would you go put yourself in a tent outside? And so that's things that I carry with me, and I think about just the duality of my positionality, the privilege that comes with it, and I'm always trying my best to like take space, make space. So even just thinking about our panel, I'm like, there's so many people who I wish we could bring them all in here and give them a voice. I'll name my friend Alex Kim, who started an amazing group here called Here Montana. And that has been a lifesaver for myself and some other people. So he created a group for Black, Indigenous people of color to be experiencing recreational opportunities, like free of charge, free gear, all those things that come with the barriers to experiencing those adventures, and also just having safety within a community of people that aren't predominantly white. Yeah, there's a lot of layers to unpack there, but I also wanted to speak to the sense of place and the sense of belonging, bringing in Heidi's language, the curiosity of what does that mean for people. I think I didn't really understand what that was until I came here. All of my family is within an hour radius of each other. My mom's one of 13 kids, all my cousins, aunts, uncles, siblings, everyone has still stayed close to home. And I'm one of the few, I think I have one other cousin that left the state. But it was really, yeah, it's taken me a while to really understand what does sense of place mean and sense of belonging. And I do often feel like a visitor in this space. I've been here for almost 10 years. But yeah, just trying to find your people constantly, your community, what you feel connected to. So soccer is something I've done since I was 4 years old, and I get out there and it's just something that brings me back in my body into myself, and that's actually where I've met a lot of other people with shared experiences to me out there. I have one good friend, I'll never forget hearing you talk about meeting the person across the campus. I was at a brunch, 8 years ago, and I get up in this house and I brought my whatever food that I brought, and I see now my friend Lauren, and we just kind of looked at each other and we're like, we gotta connect, like you're my person. And yeah, she grew up in Southern California as Cuban Mexican, and just we're always out here like, does this experience feel the same to you in this group of people? Like, okay, cool, I'm not like losing my mind. So yeah, just having those people here help you feel connected rather than disconnected. And I'm really grateful there's been a lot more space created. So here in Montana with Alex, the Latino Outdoors group, you all put on the Soul Food Sunday dinners, which brings in like a whole mix of people. And then our after school support space for youth to not feel isolated in their schools. They are able to come together in this space once a week and share their experiences, where they might be the only youth of color in their whole school, their whole middle school.
You're doing such a terrific job of reminding me of the way that our lived experience goes with us everywhere. Certainly that's for everyone. So it's not to say that people of color feel it more or have more. But in settings like this, when you are one of very few in the setting, understanding and unpacking how your lived experience causes you to interact with other people, how they perceive you, you're thinking of so many different things on so many different levels. But I want to get to something, you said something very powerful, and I want you and Murray to unpack this a little bit further for us, and that is, in New York City, Chicago, being racist or being ignorant is a choice, because you see all of these people from all over the world doing different things. And in Montana, it sounds like there's an opportunity to deal with some of the layers of racism and other issues that occur in other settings from a place of genuine curiosity, or people want to know more. They're less weighed down by stereotypes and other stuff. Tell me about, particularly, let's say during the racial reckoning, what were the conversations like in Montana in terms of the need for the white majority to understand what's going on?
I'd go, if I can go back just a little ways here and go back and talk about Ulysses Doss again. Ulysses was a professor here on campus, but he also held community meetings that were standing room only. And it was at a time when people were really investigating what it meant to be an American from a lot of perspectives here in Montana, and who was included in that definition of what an American meant. And so a lot of...
Tell me what years Doss was president?
Doss was here 72 to, I think, like 80, 83, 84, somewhere around there, He just recently passed here not too long ago. But he would hold these meetings that were standing room only. And so it was comprised of predominantly white folk in Missoula and in the surrounding area that would come in and listen and try to learn from that standpoint. Now, again, that's one particular section, but there's also a section that was outside of that was against any sense of forward movement relative to racial harmony, right? That segment still, well, we all know that it exists today. It's still out there today. They still have a fairly powerful voice, and that's the population that I'm fond of saying again, that word again, that's not willing to unlearn things that they've already learned. So those things have become solidified, they've become calcified in their system, and they want to, that's what they hold on to, and that fear that has generated initially, that's produced that to some degree, remains relatively strong with them. So what I find that we're fighting against to a very large degree, Rachel, is that fear. Find out where that fear comes from, how it manifests itself, how people pretty much internalize that, and they take that fear and they say that, we can't have these books in our schools. We can't have people making white kids feel bad because, any of this talk about the enslavement period is going to give them anxiety. So that's all, in my mind, that's all, hey, it's as real as Cheerios. It's something that's real. And that fear is what really drives them and pushes them to that degree. And so I find that those on the other side, those from the other shore, are actually fighting against that fear. How do we gird up our loins to tackle that fear? How do we develop? And one of the things that I would say here as well, I talk a lot. One of the things that I would say is that what's common amongst all of this stuff that we've talked about is what? Community. Defining community. How do we define community? How do we carve out community for ourselves when there isn't any demonstrable sense of that community around for us to grasp onto? And so what we've all talked about here to some degree, why we've come to this work, why we continue to do this work, is because it produces community to some degree. And those that are outside of that sphere, outside of that paradigm, really are comfortable in their unlearning space.
Heidi, I want you to talk about this issue of ensuring that in any equity conversation, white people are at the table and they're ready to work. They're ready to not be defensive and automatically, I don't want to, my parents didn't own slaves, so I don't want to talk about it. Talk about the need for more white people in positions of power or to be able to do something, that they need to be at the table.
Yeah, well, I think it is on the shoulders of white identity people to take the lead on anti-racism work. And especially in a state like Montana, those are the people we need to move in that direction towards deepening understanding and strengthening their allyship skills and really educating themselves and others to break a lot of those barriers and stop perpetuating consciously or unconsciously racism and all the other oppressions. Building off of what we've already heard is, yeah, a lot of folks that we work with, they haven't had opportunities to have these conversations. Just like my experience as a young person, I didn't get to be in spaces to ask those questions and interrupt stereotypes and kind of go beyond that. And what I've seen in my work over the last 17 years is once you kind of start to unravel, it is what Murray speaks of. It is fear, it is the unknown, it is lack of opportunity to learn. And so if we can be in space with people to break down those defenses and those reactions, we can actually start to build those connections, deepen awareness, and hopefully inspire action around our roles as white identity people in interrupting racism and other oppressions.
Let me open it up now. Are there any questions? Because I could keep talking all day, but let's get the microphone over to Deanna first. Oh, that's right.
One more thing. One more thing, we talked about Murray talked about creating community, and Montana is a beautiful state. It's a beautiful, beautiful place to live, and there are all these outdoor activities. I am a hunter, but I also belong to, and when we're talking about creating a place where you belong, I also belong to an organization called Hunters of Color. Because we are out in very wild spaces, right, to where you could encounter someone with a gun that may have some backwoods ideologies, right? And so when we talk about Alex Kim and the great work that he is doing, getting people of color out into the outdoors, that is also something that Hunters of Color does as well. We bow hunt, we rifle hunt. We are conservators of this beautiful land that we talk about, but we had to create that space for ourselves in order to be able to enjoy that thing that we love.
Somebody needs to do a story about that while we're I think I saw a hand over here somewhere. Deanna, yeah, let's start with Deanna.
Hi, I'm Deanna Pistono. I'm with MinPost, and I just wanted to ask, there were definitely a lot of things I related to in parts of what was said as somebody who's mixed race and has had to sort of explain a lot of things. And I was just wondering, like, in the work that you all do, is there ever sort of an exhaustion that comes with having to keep doing that explanation? And how do you take care of yourselves with that exhaustion?
Godfather, take us.
I'm older than him.
Yes, you are, sir. Go for it, Doc. I'll shut up.
So, no, don't shut up. There's something called racial battle fatigue, right? And it's a real thing. And you get sick and tired. Well, I'll speak for myself. You get tired sometimes of having to explain and over-explain things to people to a very large degree. And so you've got to find ways in which that you can find comfort in other things to some degree. I'm fond of saying, and these guys have heard me say 1,000 times, I don't care if somebody's a racist. What I care about is if you're an anti-racist. I can work with you. I don't have the bandwidth to do all the work that it takes sometimes to get you to unlearn things that you may not be willing to unlearn. So that taking care of yourself is critically important, and only you can find out what it is that moves you, where you vibrate at, what you do in order to take care of yourself. That's something that you're going to have to find. There are other groups out there that you can join and do those things to, but that's clearly up to you, and it's going to help to better define who you are, I think, once you find those things. Go ahead.
Great question, first and foremost. There is a fatigue. There's a huge amount of fatigue. There's a mental fatigue, there's an emotional fatigue, sometimes a physical stress, but every time I feel tired, I go back to my forefathers who didn't have the privilege of saying, I'm tired. And from those resources, I don't have the privilege of being tired, because if they rested, then I'm not sitting here answering your question. If they took a day off, people like Chris don't move to Montana. So the fatigue is real, but as a lot of things we do as humans, I can compartmentalize that, because I can't take a day off, because I gotta work twice as hard to get half the result. So with that being said, the fatigue is there, yeah, but I am not tired.
I keep two quotes in my wallet. They're folded up in my wallet right now. One's from Adlai Stevenson. Ooh, you guys know that one where he talks about, resting when you thought the work was done, and that's where you die at. Mm-hmm. That's one of the other ones by James Baldwin. There's 10 million quotes by James Baldwin that I need, so I don't even go into that. But I would just dovetail what you said there. Yeah.
And the fatigue part, like everyone has said,
We
is
need
a real thing.
The mic for you. So we don't want to miss your comments.
The fatigue thing is real, of course, but what I find that helps me continue to do this work is, yes, like Murray said, there are some days that I just don't feel like doing this today, right? But what everyone has shared up here is, when I get to that point, this community that we've created is also what I fall back on. To where we can sit together and just be in space together and not necessarily talk about how tired we are, but because we are all doing the same work, we know how tired we are. We can have those conversations that are just, yep, right? But it is that sense of not being alone in that tired and in that fatigue, that on some days is exactly what you need to revitalize you to continue to do this work.
Okay, who has? Get the hands up. Okay, let's go to Polly, and then we'll come up to Kamal.
Hi everyone, my name is Polly Denekla. I'm originally from New Mexico. I also come from a very rural community. I grew up very differently though, in that like 90% of my town is Native. And so I grew up in my community. But one of the things that I find very difficult now is that, because I grew up in with my people in my community where everybody looked like me, and we have 2 radio stations that are all in my language, I had such access to my culture, my community, that it's really challenging for me now, because I always say I've been burdened with the task of speaking up. And it's so hard, because every single time somebody asks me a question that I think is very ignorant, it makes me feel really sad, because it's not that just that one person. They represent an entire family, an entire community, and so it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And so it's really hard for me to continuously hear these things. I don't like being called Indian. I don't like that. And it's continuously people being like, "Oh, are you Indian?" And it's oh my gosh, okay, now you can't even get the terminology right. And it's very exhausting for me, because not only is it in my everyday life, but it's also within diverse spaces, because I'm usually the only Indigenous person in a diverse setting. And then it's on me once again, to be okay, other people of color who are, willing to learn, but then it also makes me feel really sad. So I'm just curious about how you deal and work with that.
I just want to jump in quickly and say it's so important that you are making this point. Could you bring it around to Kamal? Because on day one, when we were talking to Dr. Willie Underwood of the American Medical Association, and talked about health equity and the barriers to health equity, I mentioned weathering, the body of research that suggests that the residue, the buildup of years of having to deal with everything that you just described, is increasingly being acknowledged as one of the reasons for poor outcomes for people of color. So that's something that is very important to keep in mind. And talk about your feelings about, in this setting, and you mentioned it earlier, but you don't have the ability to say I'm tired. You have to just
Right.
keep going. But it's coming from a place of, I think, a little bit more genuine, a search for knowledge, as opposed to other settings where it's just outright hostility and ignorance. Does that make it a little easier?
Sometimes, but before I answer that, I just want to honor the strength it takes to be vulnerable in spaces like this to share your narrative. So I really appreciate that. And I'm a football coach, and when someone does something above and beyond, I always give them 2 claps. So can we give 2 claps to that person? I honor you, and I hear you, and I sympathize and empathize with you. So thank you for opening that up. I feel you. The work just needs to be done, regardless of the lens or the frame that it comes under. We are at a time where you can't ignore other people. You can't ignore other people's narratives. You may try to suppress or try to hush them through whatever tool or vessel you want to use that type of oppression through. But the work needs to be done because people are tired. That fatigue has now become, it's almost like fear. The fatigue has become something to propel you as opposed to something to hold you back. And it takes on a different type of being tired. I'm tired of being put in a margin. I'm not marginalized, but I've been put in a margin. I'm tired of not being heard. I'm tired of the odd questions. I'm tired of the purse clutching when I walk by. So for me, and what I mean by that is, as a black man in America, I walk by white women every day, and the first thing they do is clutch their purse. Like, I want to gaffle you for your stuff. You know, like, no, my shoes cost more than 80 your purses do, so I'm good on that. Thank you. So it doesn't. It creates a different sphere to work in within doing the work. I think that Missoula, Montana, as Heidi would say, is kind of the island of misfit toys. And there are a lot of people here who are willing to do the work because of their frames of reference and their history. So when those things start coming to the forefront, you start being able to read the temperature and the gauge in the room to say, this person is willing and you represent this community. This person is willing and able. You represent those 4 different communities. And then like massaging it like it's kale to bring it together to continue to do the work. And then you find the allies, you find the godfathers, you find the soul sisters, and you culminate it together.
So one of the things if it's okay. Go ahead. Just real quick, is the importance of humor through some of this stuff in terms of how we deal with each other, in particular up here on this panel. Regine put me in the mind, as my great grandmother, you put me in the mind of, you remind me of something that happens on relatively frequently in this community. It probably happens in other communities too, but I'm not in those communities. But I can be at Yolks Market or at Albertsons or the grocery stores here. And I drive an okay car, right? I'm not a big car buff or whatever. That's up to my wife. She drives whatever. But I don't care. And it's an okay car, right? I can pull up next to a 64 Pinto, right? The muffler hanging off, the windshield cracked, the doors banged up and everything. And I get out of my car and they get out of their car. This is a white person, excuse me, white people in the room, but this is a white person, gets out of the car, and we get out at the same time, and I'll be walking towards the store, and they'll look at me, and they'll come back and they'll lock their car. Yeah. They'll lock their car. So it used to kind of piss me off when I was younger, but nowadays, you gotta have fun with this stuff somehow, right? Or it's gonna kill you, right? So I go back, and they'll lock their car, and so I'll kind of take my time walking, then I'll turn around my car, and I'll walk back, and I'll look in their windshield. As they're walking into the grocery store, they're standing there bumping into stuff as they're walking into, and I could give them the old gotcha like that. So you gotta find, to some degree, some level of humor in terms of dealing with this stuff, or it'll kill you. And I come back and I tell these guys that, and they'll tell me their stories around it too. What does that do? That helps to lower the temperature to some degree. It helps to lower your blood pressure and allow you to just keep walking and keep moving.
I'm making another executive decision. This conversation is too good. So we're going to extend it a little bit more. So Kamal, and a few other questions after that.
Hi, my name's Kamal Morgan. I'm from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. I cover racial equity there. What I've always noticed, like organizations, nonprofits, from Jedi to Empire MT, these nonprofits always are created through like very significant events. And every city and town usually has their own Laquan McDonald, Freddie Gray, Breonna Taylor, and then you got like more smaller places that have their own stories that maybe rocked the community and made people come together. Did that happen at all these last maybe decade or two where there was somebody who, it could be a death, it could be violence that happened that really brought the community together, that really showed that, I guess, that solidarity with each other?
I feel like, sorry, I'm sitting next to Murray, so I'm absorbing his powers by proxy. Heidi's been doing this work for almost 3 decades. So there's different answers to that. The work was already being done. Was it amplified by the George Floyds? Was it amplified by the atrocities that were happening in our bigger cities? Yeah, it put a different light on the work that needed to be done here, which then spawned off some other things. The collective was born in that time. There wasn't a catalyst for stuff that was already being done. I think it was amplified almost after the fact. Then people started paying more attention to things that were already being done here in our communities, at least from my perspective.
And we also have a huge population of missing and murdered Indigenous women and people. You know, that is something that is not unique to Montana, but it is a serious issue. And so in terms of advocacy, you know, we're advocating for those places and those people as well, you know, because what we do know is that being in a minoritized group, there is a string of commonality at some point that we can all tug on, right, that links us all together. So while we didn't have a specific, like you said, Breonna Taylor situation like that, you know, the organization that I worked for before, we track white supremacy groups, you know, here within the state in Idaho, which is close, right? And how many are active at any particular given time. That includes the 3%ers, you know, which can include law enforcement, and a lot of situations like that, to where Montana is a state that doesn't have a whole lot of people in it, so organizations like that can operate with impunity and remain hidden. And so while we can't necessarily point to one thing that happened here, there are so many various things that have been consistently happening that people have not stepped up, other than the folks that are suffering in those communities, like the missing murdered Indigenous people and women, that we come along as organizations and we say, we're not going to lead this, but we got you. How can we help? What can we do? How can we be a support? And we are all in this together. And there is a whole lot more power of us uniting and saying, no, we all have each other's back, than it is, because this work is a heavy lift. It's a heavy lift emotionally and spiritually and physically, you know, and so we need to have each other. And if we don't do it, who's going to do it? Because we have seen that in the last 400 years, no one else has taken up the mantle to change things except those of us that require the change.
We'll take 2 more questions. So start here with Desiree.
Hi, I'm Desiree. I work with the Charlotte Observer. I guess my question is, how do you get people to the table who don't necessarily care or don't know the table exists? Like, I'm new to Charlotte, and one of the things I'm starting to see is that a ton of other people are new, and you know, they're experiencing the city in their own way, but they're not getting involved. And then sometimes as a reporter, I feel like I'm talking into a void of, like, you know, hey, look at these issues, look at these communities that are forming. Like when I lived in Denver, it's like, hey, Denver's predominantly white, but did you know there's a whole Asian population here? Did you know there's a whole Chinatown that used to be here that was destroyed? And like, as journalists, we look at our stories sometimes through metrics, and it's like, my Chinatown story didn't do well, but my story on a new coffee shop did great. So it's like, how do you get people to the table to just care and say, like, you know, let's be involved and stuff like that?
I think you first gotta go to them, you know, and find out what empowers them, where their passions are, instead of having a already a set agenda and trying to find people that fit that agenda that someone's developed, but go to them and say, what stories do you want to tell? You know, what's the prevailing narrative here that needs to get out? What do we need to find from you? Go to them and find out, because most people are willing to do that if you come to them from that perspective. But a lot of times what happens, at least I've noted, is that a lot of times stories will come from something that's popular, something that's going on right now. We want to get this because it's the hot button story. We can get that and we'll get their opinion about that. There's nothing wrong with that, but it may not be what a particular group wants to talk about. They may have something that's particular to them that they feel is more pressing than what you're bringing to them. So making sure that you're able to listen to them, making sure you're able to hear that stuff. And what I've found, and I've talked about this before too, is sometimes, and I'm not impugning any journalists in the room, but what I'm saying, sometimes that there's this, I call it the SEAL syndrome. It's just like, you come in and it's like me, of the opera syndrome rather. The SEAL is the opera is me, right? And that tends to put people off to a very large degree. You know, when you come in saying, I know more about this than you do, I just want to kind of get your stuff to fill in the story to some degree. Good reporters, and I use that term exclusively, good reporters are the ones that come in and say, you know, what is the main story here? What can I help you, how can I help to amplify your voice here?
That's a huge trend in journalism now, and I talk to a lot of reporters who are sort of on the edge of leaving the business because they feel like they're not connecting with audiences, they're not producing anything that they feel strongly about or that they feel can make a difference. And media companies are hiring community engagement people to do what, as journalists, we should have been doing all along in a lot of ways, which is just what you just said, ask people what's going on.
Can I? Go ahead.
Well, we're kind of
Press for
running out of
time. Gotcha.
Want to take one more question here from Nick.
First, thank you all for your Cincinnati. Yeah, thank you all for sharing your experiences and really just being super honest and open about what it's like to do this work here. And I want to. Sometimes we tend to like dichotomize the struggle and like the difficultness of these issues and joy. And I want to ask a question about joy, like without minimizing the struggle. Where do you find joy? How can we tell those stories too without minimizing the struggle to like really flesh out the whole of that experience, if that makes sense?
You have done a terrific job of helping wrap this conversation up. So thank you. That's going to be, I want each of you to speak to that and sort of send the journalists away with some hope. Chris, start with you.
Joy. Joy is being able to speak to groups like this. Joy is someone saying, hey, you know, I saw you speak at this event, or I've heard that you're doing this. Can we get you to come in and talk to our organization? Or I have a question and I feel like you're very approachable in the most respectful manner. Educate me, right? And that is one of those things that sends me home sometimes at the end of the day saying, okay, today in my job as a professional disruptor, I did good work, you know, and the hope, Nick, that there's going to be another person in the next week that approaches me in that same way, that not only that the work that we're doing is being seen, but that as individuals and sharing our lived experiences and our stories are impactful, that they make a difference, but that they also make people curious and wanting to find out more, to dispel any stereotypes that they may have had, right? To see that there's a completely different side of the individuals that we live with in this community. That's what brings me joy. Okay. And also being able to know that when I'm gone, this is the legacy that I leave for my children. That they can say, you know what my mom did? She did this. You know, she didn't just sit back and complain about it. She was boots on the ground, being a disruptor, and this is a legacy. And that is the blood that runs through my veins.
Jess?
Yeah, joy, I guess, in this work, I'm a very relational person, and so it's about building connection, like authentic connection, not just oh, you invited someone in this space and they're there. It's that people feel like they belong. Everyone feels like they belong. And I think that's important because we can, like you said, not minimizing the experience of adversity, oppression, all of those things, but also knowing what stories you're putting out. Are they reinforcing stereotypes? Are they reinforcing all these other things? And can we show more another light, another side to people's experiences, and yeah, just more connection rather than disconnection.
Heidi?
I would say joy for me in this work is witnessing and elevating young people and their experiences and their leadership, and almost like, clearing a path or stepping aside to just follow their lead. That gives me joy, hope, and inspiration.
Murray?
A couple different quarters. First, in expanding a sense of community. I get joy in bringing other people into the fold, people that may have that flame, that thought of becoming a social justice warrior to some degree, and bringing them into the fold. Finding likewise organizations that are out there willing to support. Susan Haypatrick is in the back of the room, back there in the corner, you guys. Susan is from United Way. United Way is our fiscal sponsor in the Black Collective. Never would have thought of that if we wouldn't have reached out to do those types of things. I find joy in my writing to a very large degree. I write on a regular basis. That helps me to identify and organize what I'm going through, and I also share those writings particularly with my family, young people in my family to some degree. I was a philosophy graduate student. My dad famously said, when I told him that I was going to do that, at least you'll know why you don't have a job. So that was my first push in terms of that stuff. So in writing and in expanding that sense of community, and also in sharing things with these folks on a regular basis.
Regine?
I take joy in coming after Jay-Z, Taylor Swift, Ariana Grande, and Beyonce. I take great joy in the pain, right? It makes me think of that old Hathaway song, Joy and Pain, and understanding that the dichotomy equals polarity, and the polarity that we're trying to create as individuals and collective is polarity for change and not necessarily for agitation. And there's a difference. I take joy in my children. I take joy in community building on microcosmic levels, like coaching football, being a mentor to Abby, which is our after-school program for the Association of BIPOC Youth. I take joy in the fact that once I am gone, I left a mark here for people who look like me, people who look like Jess, people who identify like some of you do in Western Montana. So I take joy in the hope for the future. My bad. I was listening to Ariana when I was walking across campus this morning. I was rocking out to my girl. So, sorry.
So what am I, chopped liver?
Nefertiti.
I'll take it. I don't think we have to wait to find out what the highest rated session of this training is going to be. This has been an extraordinary conversation filled with people with passion and commitment to this topic. I cannot thank you enough for taking time out to be here, to educate, to inform, and inspire these journalists. So,
I just want, for me,
go ahead.
I want to thank you.
Yeah.
I really want to thank you. And you're pulling this together and bringing all these incredible people together here and taking these learning experiences and applying them to whatever area you're going back to. That's what helps to move the dial on this stuff. So thank you all.
Thank you. Regine Seabrook, Murray Pierce, Heidi Wallace, Jess Moniz Hernandez, and Chris Young-Greer. Thank you so much for joining National Press Foundation.
Thank you. Thanks for the work you're doing. Keep telling the stories.
Stay up here because I want a picture.